Dr. N. Sreekumar is an assistant professor of philosophy in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. He is a gold medalist for MA Philosophy from the Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam. He did his MPhil and PhD in philosophy from the Central University of Hyderabad and specializes in the areas of philosophy of language, continental philosophy and hermeneutics. He has been into the academic profession since 1995 and has taught in Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kaladi, Kerala and BITS Pilani, Rajasthan before joining the IIT Madras in 2003. Dr. Sreekumar has published articles in various journals and has presented papers in national and international seminars. Some of the courses he offers include European Philosophy, Contemporary German Philosophy, Introduction to Indian Philosophy, Philosophical Hermeneutics, Philosophy and Critical Theory, and Philosophy of Language.
Welcome to the UGC lecture series in philosophy on Phenomenology and Existentialism part 37. In this episode we will focus the following topics: design as mind and as a being with others, which involves a contradiction. This is in continuation with what we have examined in the previous episode. We are analyzing the concept of design, being in the world, developed by Martin Heidegger. So Heidegger encounters a problem, or rather we, when we read Heidegger, encounter a problem. Design is on the one hand conceived as a mind. Heidegger always says that design is always mind. At the same time, on another occasion, Heidegger says that design is always a being with others. So this involves a contradiction. So we will see whether it actually involves a contradiction or not. Again we will see the concept of subjectivity and intersubjectivity, because if you understand design with an emphasis on mind, then subjectivity comes into picture. On the other hand, if the emphasis is on being with others, intersubjectivity becomes relevant. So how do you reconcile these two extremes? Again, the authentic and inauthentic existences, the two types of existence, we have already examined this concept earlier, but we will be examining it in detail now, particularly in this context. Design being with others, we will further explore this aspect, and we will further see the concept of the other, the they, as Heidegger calls it, and then naturally from this the concept of they self and authenticity of design's being. So these are the issues which we are going to focus in this episode. The contradiction in the conception of design, this is the first thing which we will examine now. Heidegger says that design's being is in each case mind, and design is a being with others. So this is the root cause of the contradiction, as I have already mentioned. Now what is this concept of mind? What is it? What does it mean to say that design is always mind? The being of design is an issue for it. This is what is meant by design is always mind. The being of design is an issue for it, while in the case of other entities, the being of those entities is not an issue for them. And again, every choice it makes about which possibilities to realize is a choice about the form that its own life will take. So whatever choices I make, or whatever choices a design makes, about which possibilities to realize, when I make a choice I am realizing my certain possibilities. It is a choice about the form that its own life will take. So, it is based on the choice I make, or based on the possibilities I realize through the choices made. Every choice it makes, every choice a design makes about which possibilities to realize is a choice about the form that its own life will take. So, in a sense, design is realizing its possibilities through the choices it makes, and it's making its own life. So, here we come across the concept of self creation, which has been discussed elaborately by several other philosophers, but particularly by Friedrich Nietzsche, a famous German thinker. The concept of self creation, which prominently figures in Heidegger's philosophy, later on many other thinkers, particularly in the philosophical systems or in the philosophical thoughts of many postmodern thinkers like Michel Foucault. Again, the world is revealed to design as its world. So, it is here the concept of mind becomes relevant, that the world is revealed to design as my world or as its world, and so that is what I have already examined this concept of concern. Whenever design relates to the objects in the world, the relationship is not that of a cognitive relationship of knowing something theoretically, distancing itself from that object, but it is always a relationship of involvement. There is a concern that objects are the world, objects are in the world for design to serve certain purposes or to materialize certain goals. Each design is an individual, the possibility of authentic individuality belongs. So, that is another concept which we have seen. The concept of authentic existence derives from this notion. Now let us examine another concept, being with others, because the Heidegger says that design is always a being with others, and one of the senses or one of the meanings of the expression design or being in the world means being with others, because the world includes others as well. Design is being in the world is a world of other people too. We are not alone in this world, but there are other people as well, and we always find ourselves among others. Design's life projects are materialized in this world of others, where others also live. So, that is one reason why others become important. We will see later in the philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre, the French thinker, philosopher and writer, how this concept of other comes into picture, because Sartre even goes to the extent of saying that in one of his plays he says that others are hell. And we have seen again in the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche how the other figures in, because Nietzsche always believes in a kind of subjectivism, in a kind of extreme form of subjectivism, where he identifies the will to power as a central driving force of all life. So, we can see the resonances of Nietzschean philosophy in Heidegger and many other thinkers. So, he says that design's life projects are materialized in the world of others, and design encounters the world as our world. So, it is not that design encounters the world as its world, but as our world, a world of other people as well, and there is a possibility of design identifying itself with others. So, the world becomes our world. Now let us contrast these two concepts, mindness and being with others. They are not contradictory to each other. That is what Heidegger's philosophy would ultimately tell us. These two things or these two concepts are not contradicting or cancelling each other. The world is a social world, means it is a world of both others and I. It is not just a world where I find myself alone, but I always find myself among other human beings. Such a world is no less mine because it is also others. And again, intersubjectivity is not a denial of subjectivity. I will take up these two things. Such a world is no less mine because it is also others. Just because the world belongs to others, or just because others are also part of the world, does not mean that this world is not mine. I too belong to this world. So, in a sense, there is a concept of us, ours, we. So, subjectivity becomes intersubjectivity, and intersubjectivity is not a denial of subjectivity, because subjectivity itself is conceived in the background of from the background of intersubjectivity. So, Heidegger would say that intersubjectivity is a further specification of the subject. Now, let us see these two concepts, subjectivity and intersubjectivity. The Design's capacity to lose or find itself as an individual determines and is determined by the way in which the Design understands and relates itself with others. So, one of the very important constituents of the Design's ontology, the Design's existential constitution, is the fact that others exist. So, the Design, as Heidegger says, has the capacity to lose or find itself. It can find itself through authentic ways of being, or it can just lose into the totality. So, but this capacity to lose or find itself as an individual determines and is determined by the way in which the Design understands and relates itself with others. So, others are very important. It is not that, unlike Nietzsche, where Nietzsche's philosophy ultimately leads to a denial of the other to some extent, not completely, but at least to some extent it suggests that other denial, but here there is no such conception at all. On the one hand, Heidegger would highlight, or Heidegger would assert the fact that this world is a world which equally belongs to others like I, but at the same time he says that I can, or the Design can always has its own unique place. How is it possible? This is the whole problem. In order to have authentic existence, or to materialize authentic existence, it has to, the Design has to have attain or materialize its own creation, self creation. But how? Our sense of who we are is a function of how we differ from others. So, here comes the concept of difference, or rather the very concept of other people separated from us brings this notion. We might deal with these differences, either seek conformity or emphasize differences. So, Heidegger takes for granted, or rather begins with the assumption that there are differences. Our sense of who we are is a function of how we differ from others, and now since there are these other people or others, how do we relate ourselves with them? Either by distancing ourselves from them, or by being conformity with it, or emphasize differences. Either seek conformity or emphasize differences. These are the two possibilities. Now, here too the other is important, even for distancing myself or differentiating myself from others, so that I can materialize my authentic existence, the other is important. So, you can never deny the other. Now, again, the relationship between subjectivity and intersubjectivity determines the Design's everyday mode of existence. So, Heidegger frequently refers to a concept called everyday mode of existence. What do you mean by this everyday mode of existence, where we take for granted several things in our everyday mode of existence. So, what determines the nature of this everyday mode of existence is the relationship between how do you relate, how does the subject relate with the intersubjective world. So, the possibilities of authentic and inauthentic existence belong to this way the subjectivity relates to the intersubjective world. Again, the loss of authentic individuality is also a possibility, and this is a very strong possibility, very active possibility as far as average everyday life is concerned. Out of these two possibilities of authentic and inauthentic existences, Heidegger highlights, or rather he advocates authentic existence, and according to him this authentic existence consists in cultivating uncommon pleasures, thoughts and reactions for authentic individuality. So, he talks about the need for cultivating uncommon pleasures and thoughts and reactions which are not popularly known, which are not there already expressed. We are not then copying anybody else, rather we are creating our own selves by cultivating uncommon pleasures and expressions. We were discussing about Heidegger's emphasis on cultivating uncommon pleasures for authentic existence. Now again we will see the Seins being with others, the Sein as everyday being with one another subjects to others, its being is taken by others. So Heidegger's language is highly complicated. It says that its being is taken by others. In the normal day to day existence, average everyday existence, the Sein's being is taken by others. What does it mean? Here what the Sein is, or most of the things which the Sein does are decided by others. So they are for others, with others and decided by others. So in that sense we can say that the Sein's being is taken by others to a large extent, but whether the Sein is lost completely, that is a question. Heidegger says that if the Sein is lost completely, then it is inauthentic existence, but there is always a possibility of gaining oneself from this others. Heidegger seems to be saying that one belongs to the others and enhances their power. The more one belongs to the other, the less one becomes powerful. This is what Heidegger seems to be saying, because you are becoming part of the other which is posed against you, and by becoming part of it you make it stronger. So the more it becomes strong, or the stronger it becomes, the weaker you become. So this is what Heidegger seems to be arguing. Here there is a quote from Being and Time. The who, quote unquote, is not this one, not that one, not oneself, not some people, and not the sum of them all. The who is the neuter, the they. So this is a very important quote from Being and Time. Who is this other? Who is this they to which Heidegger frequently mentions? And that who is not this one or that one. There is no individuality to this you or this who, and it's not some people and not the sum of all the people. The who is they, and it is with this conception of they we have to understand Heidegger's notion of the other. Other for Heidegger is not a group of genuinely individual human beings whose shared taste dictate the taste of everyone else. Then what is it? It's not an intersubjective or supra individual being which can be called as a communal self. So it's not at all a Hegelian universal mind. It's then what is it? Again, it's not a collection of definite others. It's not a single individual other. Then it is not a being to which genuine mindness belongs. So there is no individuality that can be ascribed to this they or to the outside this other. It is an impersonal construct. So this is what ultimately Heidegger seems to be arguing, that the other or the they which exists outside, which is posed against the Sein, against oneself, is an impersonal construct to which each of us gives up the capacity for genuine self relation. So this is the capacity for genuine self relation is given up to this being, to this being with others. In our being with others, what happens is we give it to the others, to which we give up our individual authentic existence, and everyone that is no one. This they is everyone that is no one, which is impersonal and which is not an individual. Again there is a quote from Being and Time. The they which supplies the answer to the question, to the who of everyday design, is the nobody to whom every design has already surrendered itself in being among one another. So I repeat, the they which supplies the answer to the question of the who of everyday design. Who is this to which you refer as the other? When we understand design as a being with other, who is this other? And this other is the they. It is nobody to whom every design has already surrendered itself in being among one another. It's nobody means it's not an individual, a particular individual or a particular community or a particular group of people whom you can identify and point out, but it is the they. And average, it is this, once design becomes part of it, it becomes average everyday mode of design. it becomes Design's average everyday mode of existence. And again here the mindness of Design takes the form of they. So Design loses its individuality, its genuine individual authenticity, and it becomes part of the they. And here self is a they self. While relating to itself, it fails to attain genuine individual authenticity. One of the characteristic features or one of the possibilities of Design is authentic existence. How this authentic existence is achieved? Heidegger says that this is achieved by relating oneself in the true way, in the individualistic manner. And here, while relating to itself, when Design fails to attain genuine individual authenticity, what becomes prominent is the they self of Design, which is inauthentic existence. Design loses in the they. Design understands the world in the way they make it available to it. So there is no uniquely Design's way of understanding the world, relating Design to the world, but rather Design understands the world in the way they make it available to it. So there are common assumptions, common presuppositions. There are no uncommon pleasures sought for here in this context, and self understanding too will be inauthentic. In this case, even my understanding of myself, who I am, itself depends on how others understand me. So self creation becomes totally impossible in this context. So inauthentic existence is the lack of self creation. Again, avoidance of unusual and the difficult. So I just see what others do and just behave in the way others behave and in the way others expect me to behave. So there is no self creation. Again, accept prevailing opinion. There is no individual authentic opinions, no genuine opinions of Design, but accept just what others say. The being with one another dissolves one's own Design completely into a kind of being of the others. So I just become a part of the other, part of the totality, losing my individuality. So this is historically, if you try to understand this concept, it's very interesting to note that existentialism as a philosophical movement became relevant when in the background of Hegelian philosophy, particularly when people like Kierkegaard's philosophy can be conceived as an antithesis to the Hegelian absolutism. So Hegel conceived a notion of absolute, the universal mind, to which all individual minds are manifestations of. So in one sense he annihilates all individualities, and existentialism can be conceived as a reaction against this totalitarianism, this assumption of universal mind which consumes or encompasses every other minds. No individuality is left. And here Heidegger seems to be arguing that the being with one another dissolves one's own Design completely into a kind of being of others. And then what is authenticity? If this is the situation where we find ourselves, then what is the meaning of authenticity? Not to be realized by isolating oneself from others. So Heidegger has been talking a lot about others and the importance of differentiating oneself from others. So this does not mean that one should isolate oneself from others. That's impossible and not necessary at all. Design's being with is not a limitation upon it, but it's a typical human way of being. So we have to understand that the being with of Design, when you try to understand Design as a being with others, this condition, this existential situation of Design, that Design always finds itself with others, should not be understood as a limitation of Design, but it's a typical way of being of man. That's the way Design exists. Authenticity is attained not by detachment from others, it is a difference in relationship. So you have to essentially relate yourself with others. It's a world of other people as well. So there is no possibility of going out, coming out of this world and existing independent of everything else, isolating oneself from others and all that. So one has to find a space in this world itself, the world of others. So it's a matter of relating yourself with others. The difference in relationship makes the difference between authentic and inauthentic existences. And in this context, let us sum up our conceptions of the being of design. Design's being is a being with others, a being in the world of other people. So again, it's a being in the world. When we conceive design as a being in the world, all these things come. It's not just a physical world, but a social world, a cultural world, a political world, a world of other human beings and their activities and practices. Again, design has to relate itself as an occupant of a role in a practice. So there are several practices in the world, there are several possibilities of being design has in this world. The world, in other words, offers certain possibilities of being to design. So I can make my choices, I can be a painter or a musician or a scientist or a doctor. In all these ways, design can explore its existence in the world. So design has to relate itself as an occupant of a role in a practice and realize its possibilities in those practices which are not its creation. So these practices, the world, the possibilities which the world offers to design are not design's creations, they are there in the world. So design has to go to the world and explore these possibilities. Socially defined and culturally inherited tasks are necessary for us. So we are at the midst of certain socially defined and culturally inherited tasks. So what I should be, or if I want to be a musician, I have already mentioned this earlier, if I want to be a musician, it's my choice, but what a musician is not chosen by me, it's not decided by me, but the society or others or the world decides it. So my being with others will essentially decide and determine certain possibilities for me, for being, for existence. With this we will wind up this episode. Let us have a summary of the topics which we have discussed in the present episode. We have seen the nature of being with others, that is one theme which we have discussed extensively in this present episode. In the following episode also we will examine this concept. Then how do we understand the concept of the other and the they? So we have introduced these notions, how to understand the other and the concept of the they, and again how authentic is design's being. This is one question which is very important in Heidegger's philosophy, the authenticity of design's being. The nature of design's being, we have seen that design can be understood as being in the world, as mine, as being with others, and several other ways. So these are the issues which we have discussed in this present episode. Now students can note down the following questions. Number 1, in what sense is design a being with? So what do you mean by the very concept of being with others basically? And they, the concept of they is an essential existentially of design. Explain the importance of the concept of they or other in the very understanding of design. And finally, how can we say that authenticity is conceived within the bounds of the they self? So we have been talking about authenticity, and we understood that authenticity is not totally isolating oneself from others, but it's always within the bounds of the they. But within the bounds of the they, one can relate oneself with others in different ways. So authenticity is understood as a difference in relationship. So this is basically you have to highlight to this question. With this we will end this episode. Thank you.